Morning, Crossing Church. My name is BJ Meadows. I'm one of the pastor elders here, and I'm really excited to be here today. We've been going through a sermon series talking about faith. Last week, Spencer talked about two ladies that saved Moses through faith, and today we're going to talk about the Israelites as they cross through the Red Sea and enter Canaan. So we're going to talk about fear and how faith conquers fear. But before we jump in, let's open up in prayer. God, we need you today. We're here to hear from your Spirit. So I just pray that your Spirit would fall and rest in this place, that your Spirit would convict our hearts, that it would change our minds and transform our minds, and that your word would just pierce our heart and help us to see you, to trust in you in the midst of fear and chaos. And God, just be with us today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Where are my high schoolers that are driving right now? Raise your hand. I want to see you. There you are. I want you to look at your parents today when you walk home and know that you are the greatest source of their fear right now. Every time you get behind the wheel of your car, they are terrified because they don't know what's going to happen. Whether you're going to drive the speed limit, they're watching that app to know what you're doing. They don't know, though. And when I was thinking about fear as a parent, the greatest source of fear is our kids. I'm not as afraid of my life anymore. I'm afraid of them, afraid of what's going to happen because there's so much unknown. And I feel like, I delusionally think I have control over my environment, but I don't have control over their environment as much as I would like. And when I was thinking about this, so as a new parent, with your first kid, I feel like that's the greatest moment of fear. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what you're doing. Every little boo-boo you freak out over, and you just get hysterical. You call people, you call your mom, you call your dad. You don't know what to do. They got a little cut. You go to the ER. You don't know what to do. And with my firstborn, she terrified me all the time. If you've ever met Alethea, she climbs on everything. I think she can look at a drywall, just like a flat wall like that, and just figure out how to climb it. That's my daughter. And she's crazy. So I hate Disney World. You guys can judge me all you want. I don't care. I call it Satan's paradise. It is hot. I sweat a lot. The food is expensive and tastes like cardboard. And I'm standing in a line for 2 hours to ride a 30-second ride. Okay, they're pretty good. But you're trapped there with kids, and they make it 3 hours, especially when you're bringing a 3-year-old, which is when we brought Alethea for the second time. She was 3. So she makes it 2 hours, and she's cranky and whiny. She gets a nap, and we try and soak in the day more because it's awesome. The best part of Disney is leaving. And when you get that 2-hour drive back to Orlando, I've set in air conditioning, and the first thing I want to do is take a shower and then go to bed. So we get home, we pull into the driveway. I do the responsible adult thing. I pick up my 3-year-old and I put her in the house. I'm not leaving her in the car. My wife is a nurse. I know what I'm doing. And I responsibly take the keys off my belt and put them on the counter. I'm not leaving my keys, losing my keys somewhere because I'll lose stuff. So 2 first things that need to go in the house are in the house. And then I turn around, I go outside, and the door slowly closes behind me. My wife is outside cleaning out the car because that's our role. I pick up all the luggage like a man and I take it inside in one trip. Not 2 trips, 1 trip. So the door closes behind me. Lock. I don't hear it yet. I go out and I get the luggage and I walk back. Kelly, open the door. I got all this luggage I got to bring inside. Door won't open. What am I supposed to do? The door just locked. My daughter's inside. So we start freaking out because our daughter's locked inside and she climbs on everything. So I run around to the French doors in our backyard and I look in through the window because I can see everything. And there is Alethea on the top shelf in the pantry. She has grabbed the bag of marshmallows. I'm like, oh crap, my daughter is over my head and about to fall. So I run around, I'm like, I gotta break into my house. I'm gonna get a hammer, I'm gonna get a pry bar, I'm gonna do something and bust into my house. I run around back, Alethea's made it down to the ground, thank God. she has the bag of marshmallows, and I'm prying the door open. Yes, I broke into my own house. I figured out how to do it. I pried the bar open, got the French doors busted open, and there's Alethea, ripped off her diaper with a bag of marshmallows, eating marshmallow, pooping on my floor. There aren't things to describe the kind of fear that you experience as a parent. It's funny now. I mean, yeah, it's awesome. But in that moment, I was terrified. My little baby girl, I'd never thought I'd have a daughter, and now I have 3. You can't control these things. We experience fear, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is how as Christians we can respond to this fear and how we can trust God through our fear. And the bottom line for today is faith conquers our fear when we look to Jesus and we trust in God's power, not in our abilities. So that's what we're going to talk about today as we jump into Hebrews and we talk about these Israelites. And one of the cool things is when you look at the Israelites, they kind of mirror our relationship with God because they're up and down, up and down. We don't get things right all the time, and they don't get things right all the time. And the closer they get to God, the more they struggle. And that's what we're going to talk about too, is trials. How when we go through these things that cause us fear, how can we respond in faith and trust that God is going to show up in power and do something. So open up your Bibles to Hebrews 11, 29 through 30. And it's on the screen in ESV, our typical translation. By faith, the people crossed the Red Sea as on dry land, but the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same, were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. So when I first thought of these stories like 2 months ago when Jonathan said, this is what you're preaching on, I'm like, why does the author of Hebrews say the Israelites were faithful? Like when I remember that story, I remember them complaining a lot. They get to the Red Sea, like, why have you done this? Let me go back to Egypt. It was better there. This is stupid. Why has God led us to be slaughtered by the Egyptians here? Like, they don't have faith. But as I dug in and I looked at this verse, what I saw is it's not the faith to stand at the side of the river. It's faith that made them cross through the river. So we're going to look at the faith that it took to walk through the sea that should have killed them and into the hope and promise of freedom with Jesus. And then we're going to look at a really cool story that's like every kid's Bible story of where they march around the walls of Jericho, they blow their trumpets, and then all the walls fall down. So we're going to talk about the faith that it took for them to do something radical and crazy. Instead of picking up a sword, they picked up a trumpet and marched around the city, and God made cool things happen. So we're going to check out those 2 stories and talk about the faith that they show us. So we're going to jump into the Old Testament, Exodus 14, 11 through 27. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians, for it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." And Moses said to the people, "Fear not, stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent." The Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. Lift up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they shall go in after them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his host, his chariots and his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gotten glory over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen." We're going to jump ahead to verse 21. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove back the sea by a strong east wind all night and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went in after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And in the morning watch, the Lord in the pillar of fire and cloud looked down on the Egyptian forces and threw the Egyptian forces into panic, clogging their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from before Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course when the morning appeared. And as the Egyptians fled into it, the Lord threw the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. So when you look at their first response, it's fear. They're standing on the edge of a river, and they're complaining. I mean, I think I would probably complain too. God, what are you doing? You just led me to this river, and here they are, this mighty force of Egyptians, and they're about to destroy me. They're afraid. They ask Moses questions. Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? I sense some sarcasm there, but they're right. I think they're pretty ticked off. They wanted to be back in Egypt. Leave us alone. We would have been better off there. What are you doing? Instead of focusing on what God was doing in that moment, they were focused on their circumstances. They were focused on the thing that was making them afraid instead of what God was going to do. In that moment, they hadn't trusted in the promises that he had made to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph. They had looked at their circumstances and said, I'd rather be back there being a slave. But what's cool is in this moment, God doesn't give up. He doesn't say, I'm done with you, get out of here. I'm going to go find another people and make them my people. He gives them a chance to respond in faith. He relationally invites them to watch. What am I going to do? Watch. It's going to be awesome. All you have to do is be silent. You just have to watch me do something cool. And in that moment, they get to respond in faith. They exhibited fear, but they get to see God split the sea, and then they get to walk through it. And we nonchalantly like, oh yeah, they walked through the sea. It's super cool. I like surfing, and I've surfed with Robert Strickler a few times. I've told him one of the things I'm afraid of is a 10-foot wave when I'm standing at the bottom. Like, it's terrifying. You think it's easy because so many people do it. 10 feet doesn't seem like a lot. I'm 6'4", so it's only like maybe up there a little bit more. But when you're at the bottom of it, it's scary. So in that moment where they start walking, they see these, I imagine, like 30, 40-foot walls of water, and they just walk through knowing God split it, God's going to hold back the sea, and we're going to be fine. They trust in the promises again. They have faith because God has invited them into a relationship where they can have faith. They've seen what God is going to do. They've experienced that he is good, and they're going to walk through the walls of water. And this is what Jesus does. When we look at Jesus, I think Jesus kind of has a sense of humor about these things. Because when you look at his relationship with the disciples, he does this all the time. They go out into the Galilee on a boat, and Jesus takes a nap. And while Jesus is taking a nap, a storm rages, and the disciples are like, we're going to die. Jesus, wake up, we're going to die. What are we going to do? And then Jesus is like, why are you of little faith? Come on, be still. And he just nonchalantly like, come on, I can take care of this. I got you. And he does it again. He's like, you guys go on ahead of me, and I'll meet you on the other side. I don't know what they were thinking. Like, the Sea of Galilee is pretty big. But like, Jesus is going to just find us on the other side. So they go on ahead of him. Same thing happens, but Jesus isn't there. Like, what are we going to do? And then Jesus is walking on water. And he's just strolling. I imagine him strolling. He's the God of the universe, so he's just chill. Like, what's up, guys? And Peter's like, Lord, if that's you, call me and I'll come out to you. So Peter gets off the boat because Jesus says, come on, let's do this. And Peter looks at Jesus for a few steps, and then he stops looking at Jesus, and he sinks. But the point of it's not that he sank. The point of it's that he took that step. The disciples have this opportunity to be in a relationship with Jesus and explore faith, to trust, to have opportunities to trust him. It's a relational thing where they can build that trust with God. None of these things happened by chance. God didn't lead the Israelites to the edge of the Red Sea on accident. He wanted them to be there so that he could show his power, so that he could display his glory and show that he is a God that you can trust. He's not going to abandon them on the edge of the river. Instead, he is going to make something miraculous happen and show up and give them something, a foundation to believe in. And that's what he does. He's relationally inviting them to have faith. And those are one of the best opportunities that I think we have as Christians, is to develop our faith. James says, consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. Those trials draw us closer to Jesus. They make life harder, yes. but they make it so that we become more dependent upon Jesus. And that's the first point is faith conquers our fear. When we look to Jesus, we need to look at him. We don't need to look at our circumstances because our circumstances are going to fail us. Everything that Paul uses to describe us, he says we're aliens, we're ambassadors. We don't belong here. We're supposed to be looking forward to the future, to being with Jesus. That is our ultimate goal. So that's what he's doing, is he's relationally inviting us to have faith that looks ahead to the future of what God is going to do ultimately through Jesus. So how do we respond to fear when these circumstances feel out of control? Because we can't control our kids' lives. We were talking in small group, like our kids, some of them have trouble making friends. We can't control what they do at school. Like Kelly and I are talking about letting our kids get lunch food, something stupid and simple. But how are we going to control what they eat? We can't even stop them from doing stuff sometimes. So when things are out of control, what are we supposed to do when we experience fear? Look at 2 Corinthians 11, 24 through 29. Flipping back to Paul. And this is one of those lists Paul makes about his life. And it's easy, I think, to look at Paul, and he is a good model to look at. He says, look at me and follow me and do what I do. But he's also a man. So I don't think that we should read this and not see fear in it. But Paul responds to fear, I think, how we should. So he says in 2 Corinthians 11, 24 through 29, 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes less one. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at sea, on frequent journeys and dangers from rivers, danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers, in toil and hardship through many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst, often without food, and cold and exposure. And apart from other things, there is a daily pressure on me of my anxiety for all the churches. Who is weak, and I am not weak? Who is made to fall, and I am not indignant? So Paul has experienced all of this, yet he has chosen to have faith, to trust that God is going to do something through all of this. In the midst of all of those things, he's like, but the thing that weighs on me most is the pressure of knowing that these people are okay, that they know Jesus. That's his ultimate driving focus in his life, is Jesus in the midst of all of that. And I don't know about you guys, but I think 2020 sucks. I just want 2021. And I said that about 2019. Kelly and I made a joke all last year about how this year sucks. Bring on 2020. Man, that was bad. And that's what we're saying now. Come on, let's just get ahead of all of this stuff, this election. Let's throw COVID out of the door. I'm tired of wearing a mask and fogging up my glasses. But that's not what Paul's focusing on. He's not focusing on his circumstances. All of these trials that we're suffering through together, God's doing something. He hasn't abandoned us as much as we may think that, and I've thought that. If you look at 2 Timothy 1:7, this is Paul's response to fear. And if you know, or if you've studied anything about Timothy, Timothy was a young man as a pastor, probably late teenager, maybe early 20s, and he's pastoring an older flock of people. So they're challenging him. He's afraid that he's not got the stuff to handle it. So Paul writes to him and says, "For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and of love and self-control." That's how we need to respond in faith. God provides difficult and impossible situations not to beat us into submission, but to call us to have faith, to relationally invite us to know him. He wants us to watch him work, to see him do things that don't make sense. He puts impossible situations in front of us so that we can't do it on our own, and we have to trust him to show up. And I was joking with Jonathan earlier this week. He asked me, "BJ, you ready? You feeling pretty good?" I'm like, "Yeah, I feel pretty good." And I always make the joke, but Jesus does it anyway. I think he has a sense of humor. He said, "You feel prepared?" I'm like, "Yeah, my life is kind of chaotic. Like, I'm preaching about fear, and 2 weeks ago, Kelly's boss said, you don't have a job anymore. In a month and a half, it's over. So, I think it's funny because I'm preaching on fear right now, and that's a pretty fearful thing. I'm a teacher, so I make like chicken scratch next to what Kelly makes. So in my mind, I'm like, worst case scenario, all right, selling the house, selling the cars, moving back in with my mom, 4 kids, my mom's going to love it. But I preached to myself. I went back and looked at this. I'm like, all right, I need to start responding in faith, not in Mr. Fix-It mode, which is my go-to. Like, I want to fix everything. Kelly has a problem. She hates it because I'm going to fix it right now. We're going to email all these people. We're going to find all these jobs, and we're going to fix it. But after a little bit of that, I slowed down, and I reflected back on Jesus and on this stuff that God was preparing in my heart. And God started to show up. And he doesn't always show up in the ways that you want him to. She got 2 job offers on Friday, which was great. He hasn't always shown up for me like that. Sometimes it's, you need to go do something else. I was convinced when I was in seminary, and you guys were here when I was doing that, that I was going to be a pastor forever. And 6 years ago, he's like, I finished seminary. He's like, go be a teacher. I'm like, that sucks. But I did it, and I love it now. You never know what God's going to do. Sometimes he says no and go somewhere else and figure it out. But God hasn't abandoned me, and he's not going to abandon you. He's not going to abandon us. And he didn't abandon the Israelites when they passed through the watery death into the promise of freedom with him forever. So when we're struggling with faith, when we're struggling with fear, we need to preach the gospel to ourselves. Remind ourselves constantly that he's got our back. Because it's so easy to forget that God is present in this dark and broken world. We look to other people to fix our problems and think that if this one guy or this one guy, the election's a great example. None of them are going to fix our problem because our problem is sin. Our problem isn't these issues. We need Jesus. We need Jesus to come and fix these problems. And Jesus did fix these problems. And he's going to ultimately fix them when he comes back. So he wants us to learn to trust him. And if you look, we're going to fast forward 40 years, and we're going to talk about the Israelites when they enter the promised land. They look out on Jericho, and they're like, we're going to take that city. Massive walls, they don't know what I'm going to do, but somehow God's going to show up. So as they enter the promised land, they do 2 things. They circumcise everybody, grown men too. And then they celebrate the Passover. Both of those are relational aspects of their relationship with God. So they're kind of unifying themselves around God again, getting their lives in order with his design, with what he wanted them to do. So after they did that, it's like, now it's time to cleanse the land. Let's go. God's going to use them as an instrument of judgment. So they're going to go trample these Jerichoans, I guess. I don't know what to call them. But pick up in Joshua 5, 13 through 15. Something really cool happens. I imagine Joshua kind of walks out on the top of a mountain. He's looking down at Jericho like, how am I going to kill these guys? So when Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him, and his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, are you for us or for our adversaries? And he said, no. But I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come. Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said to him, what does my Lord say to his servant? And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. This is a really cool moment. This is actually one of my favorite stories in the Old Testament because I believe this is Jesus. This is the commander of the Lord's army. It's not an angel, it's a man. And he's standing with a sword drawn, which is super cool. He walks out, and Joshua's response is, are you for me or for them? So Joshua recognizes that this man has authority and power to do something. And that's cool too. And then Joshua's response when he says, no, but I'm the commander of the army of the Lord, is he falls on his face and worships him. You don't worship angels. They're just created beings like us. He worships this man. And then this man says, take off your sandals, for you're standing on holy ground. So this is Jesus. It's called a Christophany. When you see Jesus, there's 5 others of them in the Old Testament. So he's standing in the presence of Jesus, and then Jesus gives him the battle strategy. And that's what comes next in Joshua 6, 1 through 5. Says, now Jericho was shut up inside and outside because of the people of Israel. None went in and none came in. None went out and none came in. And the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have given Jericho into your hand, with its king and mighty men of valor. You shall march around the city, all the men of war going around the city once. Thus you shall do for 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets on ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat. And the people shall go up, everyone straight before him. I love the language that Jesus uses here. He says, I have given them. That's past tense. It's like, it's already happened. Let's do this. The Lord has given them into our hand. So we're going to do this not in our power because God's already done it. It's a crazy, miraculous thing that God does. And he says it about our faith too. It's already been secured through Jesus. He's given us faith. God's going to fight for them, and the battle plan is reckless. It's ridiculous. You don't fight with trumpets. You fight with swords, and you don't just march around people. You go and attack them. But God's like, you're just going to watch me do stuff. You're going to participate. It's going to be fun. You're just going to walk around, and then I'm going to do awesome things. In Joshua 6, 12 through 17, we see God show up. We see God fight for them. In Joshua 6, 12 through 17, then Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. And the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord walked on, and they blew the trumpets continually. And the armed men were walking before them, and the rear guard was walking after the ark of the Lord while the trumpets blew continually. And the 2nd day they marched around the city once and returned into camp. So they did for 6 days. On the 7th day they rose early at the dawn of day and marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. It was only on that day that they marched around the city 7 times. And at the 7th time, when the priests had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. And the city and all that is within shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction. So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. And as soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, and every man straight before him, and they captured the city. So as God declares, I've given them to you, this is what you're going to do. Once again, it's a relational invitation. You're going to participate. It's going to be sweet, but I'm going to do the dirty work. I'm going to break these walls down. I'm going to do the heavy lifting. You don't have to come to me with a battle strategy, which was what Joshua was trying to do. You just need to come to me and have faith that I'm going to show up and do something. And it's going to be miraculous because that's what God does. He does things that defy logic, and he does the impossible, things that we can't even think are impossible. He does them anyway. And he shows up when we don't expect him to. They're going to watch and witness what God is going to do with their faith. He wanted them to see that he was what they needed, that he was all that they needed. And if you look at the history of the Israelites, that is their lesson. That is our lesson, is that we need Jesus more than everything else that this world has to offer. And you see when they, you look at the story of Judges, like, we want a king, we're tired of these judges, give us someone besides a prophet to lead us. God's like, I'm king, I'm your king, I'm all you need. They're like, no, we want a king, give us Saul, give us David, give us Solomon. And then those guys fail. But they also point ahead to the ultimate king of our life, which is Jesus. Jesus is going to come, and he's going to save us. He's going to be the king of our life, the one that we need, that's going to fix all of our problems that we see in this world, that's going to fix the biggest problem, the thing we're most afraid of, which is death, which is the sin that brings death. Jesus is going to fix that. So that's our second point, is faith conquers our fear when we trust in God's power, not in our abilities. We can't do anything to solve those problems. We can't do anything to fix the problems in our world right now. All we can do is trust the author and perfecter of our faith to do what he said he's going to do, to show up and save us, to reconcile the world to himself, and to ultimately bring about a perfect world through his Son that we get to be a part of. If you look at 2 Corinthians 5:21, Paul said, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. God sent Jesus to bear our sin, guilt, and shame so that we could become the righteousness of God, so that when Jesus looks on you, when he looks on me, he doesn't see sin, he doesn't see shame, he sees Jesus. And that's the rights that we have as heirs of the kingdom with Jesus. He looks at us and sees his Son, so that we can cry out to him, Abba, Father, and have that relationship that when we're afraid, we can have faith. When the world is in chaos, we can look at him and know God's got this. He hasn't abandoned us. It may not look good. The Israelites were in captivity, or were in slavery with the Egyptians for 400 years. There's a lot of generations that passed that weren't going to see the promised land. But they had to look forward knowing that even in the midst of their suffering and trials, that God was going to show up. When we were in small group a couple weeks ago, when brain fart, Jonathan, wow. He was talking about Abraham. There's where I got the A from. We were talking about Abraham and his trials and how he had to offer Isaac up. And we were just like, it's crazy that God would even come up with that. These trials, like what's the point? And that's what we were trying to figure out, is why would God do this? And I remember talking with Spencer, like, I don't remember a time in my life where there wasn't some sort of a trial, big or small, going on in my life. It was just like a continuous string of this. It's just like out of one fire into the next fire. And we're just sitting here like, it just keeps happening. And Jesus hasn't abandoned me, but why this? Why this? Why did Kelly need to lose her job? I couldn't answer all these questions. But as I started thinking through, and the fear that would build up as I was thinking about them, I'm like, God wants to decrease our independence and increase our dependence on him. That's what every trial I can think about has done in my life. No, it's not you, it's me. No, you stop looking at that. You need to look at me. Every little thing that we think is important pales in comparison to Jesus. And that's what happens when we don't look at Jesus, when we trust in our own abilities instead of his power, is we get lost in the weeds. I get lost in the weeds. And we need to find Jesus in the midst of our suffering and trust that he's going to show up. He wants your faith to increase, so he may lead you to the Red Sea and make you say, what's going on? He may lead you to a wall that you can't climb and make you say, what's going on? And then in those moments, that's when God is going to show up, and he's going to relationally invite you to trust him, to have faith and see that he is going to show up. And it's probably not going to be the way you want him to, but it's going to be the way you need him to. His ultimate goal is not your happiness, but it is for your faith to increase. It is for you to know him and be transformed by the power of the gospel in a greater way. That's what God wants for your life, for my life, is to know him. So that's what these trials are doing. That's why he leads them to these places. And when I look at America, I think as Americans, we're conditioned to fight. Like, we see something, let's go attack it. We have all of these wars in our past. Our American dream is built on my bootstraps being laced really tightly, and I can go conquer the world. If you work really, really hard, everything will be given to you. That's the American dream, right? You work hard, go to college, get a job, get a house, have kids, then you die. That's not what God wants for your life. And that's what God is going to do. At least that's what he's done in my life, is he's going to continue to give you obstacles in your life, trials and suffering, to where you have to trust in him so that you'll remember that he's bigger than this world, that he has overcome this world. So our big idea is faith conquers our fears when we look to Jesus and trust in his power, not in our abilities. Sin is not yours to defeat, it's God's. And the best news is that he already did. He did it through Jesus. All of your fears, all of your sin are done because he has already shown up and he is going to show up again. He conquered our fear, and by faith in him, we too, through him, will overcome the world. Let's pray.